Hello and welcome again to the Scottish Housing News podcast, with me, Kieran Finlay and Jimmy Black. On the surface, today's episode could perhaps be the most light-hearted subject that we've covered on the podcast to date, because for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about dogs and pets. But the issue of whether social housing tenants should have the right to keep them can be a divisive one.
Yeah, there's nothing light-hearted for many people about dogs and property, Kieran, but anyway, let's add in potential property damage, neighbour complaints, or the harsh realities of homelessness, and you can begin to see why. Many see the new Housing Scotland Act as a step in the right direction for renters with pets. Has it gone far enough? To answer that and other questions, we're joined by Jennifer Leonard, who's the pet-friendly housing lead at Dogs Trust, and she's been driving a national pilot to help landlords support responsible pet ownership. And we also have Linley Anderson, the Director of Housing Services at Angus Housing Association, who's been putting that guidance into practice.
Jennifer, thanks for coming on to the podcast today. Can you start by explaining the origins of the pet-friendly housing pilot? What problem was it that you were trying to solve with this pilot? And what did you see happening on the ground with dogs being relinquished?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. It's always a bit of an odd fit having an animal welfare organisation in the housing sector. So always useful to explain kind of why we're here. I work within the outreach team at Dogs Trust, so we work with owners directly, we're owner facing, to make sure that people can stay with their pets kind of regardless of what's going on in their personal lives. For over 10 years now, we have run our Together Through Homelessness scheme. So we work within the homelessness sector to support homeless services to become dog friendly. The reason for that is because a significant amount of dogs are handed into our care because of issues with housing or homelessness. That figure is 1 in 10 in Scotland and 1 in 7 across the UK. So 1 in 7 rehoming inquiries that we get is because someone is experiencing homelessness or housing issues, and really that's the problem that we're trying to solve. So with our work in the homeless sector, we survey all the services that we work with every single year. We ask them what's working well, what isn't. Through those surveys, the services have told us that there can sometimes be a little bit of a bottleneck, particularly in accommodation services, if someone is not able to access pet-friendly permanent accommodation with their pet. And really that's the background to the pilot. I would say that the problems are more acutely felt in other parts of the UK and also in the private rented sector, but the pilot was established as we had really warm contacts here. The social housing sector is pretty receptive to change, and we really wanted to develop our tools, prove that they worked, and then take them to more kind of challenging areas of the housing sector.
There are some charities, for example, who won't accept homeless people if they have dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's difficult. I mean, quite well-known charities. There are others who are good and do accept them. I think Glasgow City Mission's one of the better ones. But, what's the practical problem if you can't find alternative accommodation for the pet? What's the actual consequence of that?
So people can be put in a really difficult position where they're having to choose between accessing accommodation or keeping their pet. So for some people that can mean that they choose to rough sleep with their pet, or it can mean that they have to either foster or rehome their pet to access a safe place to live. So that's why our Together Through Homelessness scheme exists. So we work with homelessness services across Scotland, across the UK, to encourage them to become dog friendly so that people don't have to make the choice. And the pet friendly housing pilot that I work on is really an extension of that work, trying to support people through their whole housing journey with their pet.
And there are some people who would suggest that having dogs sleeping on the streets is just cruel. So, can that be allowed?
We have a whole FAQ section on our website that people can access if they have that question in their minds. What we find and what research has found is that in that situation, people are much more likely to put the needs of their dog first. So if they get paid, they will feed their dog before they feed themselves. They'll make sure that their dog has a blanket and a warm place to sleep before they ensure that they have that for themselves. There's also other organisations that provide essential items for people living on the streets with their dogs. But yeah, consistently we find that the welfare needs of the dogs or the other pets are met before the needs of the person are met.
Linley, thanks for coming on the podcast. Tell us about your role at Angus Housing Association and how you first became involved with the Dogs Trust.
So I'm Director of Housing Services, so we cover all the housing management, customer service within the Housing Association. So obviously when it comes to us being responsible for housing management, we're responsible for the tenancies and the tenancy agreement, and part of that is when people have got pets. Our tenancy agreement currently allows tenants to have either one dog or one cat. And we do have quite a comprehensive pet policy. But we were approached by the Dogs Trust, and we thought this would probably be an opportunity for us as well to make sure that we have got everything in place that we need to have in place. So we thought it'd be a really good exercise to go through with the Dogs Trust, and we did do that. We went through this exercise, and it probably helped us just ensure that our policy, because Dogs Trust went over our policy, looked at our policy, made recommendations for a couple of things that we had missing. We had a lengthy conversation about the fact that our tenancy agreement only allows one dog or one cat. And we used to ask for permission. We used to expect tenants to ask for permission for pets. But what we were finding is the amount of permissions we were getting and the amount of pets that were living within the properties weren't matching up. So we agreed that it was just too difficult to ensure that everybody was asking for permission. So we withdrew that. The other issue we had prior to the Dogs Trust meeting with us is that we were allowing tenants to have more than one pet, as long as there wasn't any issues. Things were coming up things were happening with regards to, say, a tenant's family member had passed away, and they'd lost the family member, and then the family member's pet was needing to be rehomed. So a lot of them were like, I've lost my mum, I don't want to lose my mum's dog. So it got a bit difficult for us to say no, especially when it was a good tenant was looking after their house and their property appropriately, and their dog, that another small dog or another cat coming into the household wasn't going to make that much of a difference. So we allowed it. The only issue we had is that some tenants would complain about other tenants having more than one animal living in the property. But our view was that we would take action when required, and that didn't matter whether there was permission or not. If permission had been granted and there was an issue, we would take action. If permission hadn't been granted because we weren't aware, we would still have to take that same action.
So you left yourself a little bit of wriggle room.
Yes.
A bit of leeway.
Yes.
Case by case basis.
Yeah. So now we've obviously spoken to the Dogs Trust and we've spoken to our solicitor, and we are looking to review our tenancy agreement. We're actually just waiting on all the guidance coming for the 2025 Act before we do that. And we'll probably remove the permission for the one pet. At the end of the day, we don't allow breeding within the properties, and we don't want to see tenancies overrun by pets. But if somebody's looking after a dog and a cat or two dogs and there's no issues, then I doubt the sheriff, if he wanted to take action, would allow us to take action. There's more serious issues than someone having two dogs or two cats that aren't causing any issues within the tenancy. And our view was we'll just take action where needed and when needed.
Linley, how will you get that message across to tenants? Because there is something about tenants, they have folk memories about the rules that happened, 30, 40, 50 years ago, whatever the council used to do, when council housing first came up. Like rules about how much washing you can put out, rules about how many pets you can have. How do you get across to the tenants that there will be a change and you're going to have a more liberal outlook?
We put stuff in our tenancy agreement, and also through working with the Dogs Trust, they checked out our website. So we did have a bit on our website about pets, but they helped us develop that a bit more and gave us more useful information to put on. So we have a dedicated page on our website for pets, and within that there's drop downs providing more information. We've also worked with the Dogs Trust with regards to domestic abuse, because we know that there's that same issue for people when they're homeless or whether they're suffering from domestic abuse and have to move on, that they don't necessarily get to take their pets with them. So we've worked with the Dogs Trust and Cats Protection, and we do have the links there as well. Staff have went through the training, and they've received the training from Dogs Trust and Cat Protection about the fact that they can support people suffering from domestic abuse and look after their animals while they're being rehomed. So we have all that on our website as well, and that's through working with Dogs Trust.
So Manor Estates became the first accredited organisation in Scottish social housing sector. What did they have to demonstrate to achieve that status?
Yeah, so the pilot was a 3-year pilot. It began in January 2023 and it ended in January of this year. And there was 3 stages of the pilot, I suppose. The first stage was very much about researching the pet-friendly housing offer across the social housing sector in Scotland. We developed quite a comprehensive survey that was sent out to all RSLs and local authorities. We developed a scoring matrix, so based on the answers that they gave us, we awarded different scores to give us a short list of partner housing associations or housing providers that we could work with in phase 2 of the pilot. Manor Estates came out on top of that scoring system as a result of the survey on a few different bases. So we wanted to have a partner housing association in phase 2 of the pilot, and that would allow us to develop resources to help support landlords to become pet friendly and the accreditation scheme to recognise that. We wanted a kind of mid-size landlord so that they weren't going to be really big and far-reaching and have a lot of different hoops for us to jump through to get things moving. On the flip side, we didn't want them to be too small, so it would be difficult for us to demonstrate impact. We also wanted them to be relatively pet-friendly so that we didn't have to spend a lot of that phase 2 trying to convince the landlord, convince the staff, maybe the management of the benefits of allowing pets in properties. So Manor Estates kind of fitted the bill across all of those. They did allow pets, they did have a pet policy in place, but it was a bit out of date, needed updating, and they just wanted a bit of support to ensure that staff knew how to use that policy and work with us to develop resources to give to their pet owning tenants as well. So with them and with the kind of wider housing sector and the animal welfare sector, we developed our pet friendly housing toolkit. So this is a set of steps that social landlords can take in order to become pet friendly, and we've developed resources such as the template pet policy to sit behind that as well. So Manor Estates took all of the steps in the toolkit, kind of embedded a pet-friendly approach across their organisation, and as a result of that, we accredited them as Scotland's first pet-friendly social landlord, as recognised by us. We then took that work in phase 3 across the rest of Scotland.
Generally, how was the toolkit and the accreditation being received in the sector?
Yeah, pretty positively. I think it's been a great benefit that the Housing Scotland Act has come along at the same time. That's not a coincidence. The toolkit really allows landlords, I think, to kind of get ahead of the Act and make sure that they're meeting all of the requirements of the legislation, and that they've got resources from us to support that. So we really promote responsible pet ownership. We don't just want everyone to have a pet, regardless of kind of what's going on or regardless of how well they're looking after that animal. Yeah, we developed lots of resources to support responsible pet ownership. One of the main resources being our information packs. So these cover the 6 main pet species that people might have. We have a version for tenants and a version for staff. The tenant version is split into 2 sections. So it has the first section, which covers the welfare needs of each species and how tenants can look after their pets responsibly. And the second section is a signposting resource. So all of the local services that they can access if they do need support with any aspect of pet ownership. And we've developed the staff version, which is similar. Has a kind of troubleshooting guide for staff working for a housing association in relation to any pet-related issues that they might come across, and then also has a signposting section. So if staff members are receiving any complaints about pets or just are aware of any issues, they can use that information pack to signpost people in the right direction for a bit of support with that and hopefully nip those issues in the bud.
Linley, all of these resources, but the Dogs Trust have made those available. What practical changes have you made? Now, you've told us about the tenancy agreements and the possibility of more dogs. Have you had to alter any other rules or deal with it? I mean, there's antisocial behaviour to deal with, for example.
We were in the process because of the 2024 housing bill. So we were in the process of looking at our pets policy again and looking at change. But what it has allowed us to do, the resource packs, we have them, every new tenant is given a copy of them. So we developed a QR code because we were starting to feel that tenants were getting lots and lots of information, and maybe at that time when they're moving in, they weren't necessarily understanding everything because they're more interested in the keys and moving in, not thinking about pets and how to deal with pets. But the QR code now gives them the availability of the 6 packs, so they can look at them and read them as and when. It also allows our staff, because it deals with both, gives them the expertise and a bit more experience and information to deal with when they're speaking to tenants about looking after pets. But we do have some antisocial behaviour, but that's the kind of thing that we'll have to deal with at that time. One of the biggest things is people not picking up after their pets. And I think we did some work with you, with the Dogs Trust on that. And leaflets, they provided us with new leaflets on how to deal with that. I put some stuff in the newsletter. I think we're given an article for the newsletter, which we put in. And we've also purchased some poo bags from Dogs Trust that we'll have now that we're trying to give out to tenants. So there's lots of things that we're probably a bit more focused now. And I think it's quite good to be a bit more focused, knowing that the 2025 Act and implications of that will be coming in soon. So it has focused us as an organisation to look at pets, and it allows us, because I think we've went through that. I think when we're providing information to tenants now, and we say that we're a pet-friendly housing association, it makes them realise that we're not against them having pets. But the good thing about the packs, when you get them, they do say that tenants have got a responsibility for looking after their pet, which is something that we probably never had before. We just used to speak about, oh, if you want a pet, you need to ask for permission. We never spoke about welfare or anything. We didn't have any of that in discussions with them. But now within the packs, that's all there. So I was a wee bit worried about becoming a pet friendly, thinking, does this make everybody think that we're just going to let everybody have lots of pets? But the actual information is really good because it focuses in on the welfare of the animal. There's lots of things that you've got in it. So for me, I quite like having it now because it's not us saying to somebody you need to look after. It's an actual animal agency saying this is how you should be looking after your pets. So it's beneficial.
What can you do when it all goes wrong? I mean, there's a case in the paper just now where you've got a man who allowed his big dog to actually eat his little dog and neglected them both. And it's a horrible case. He's gone to jail.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if that was one of your tenants, what would that mean for the association? What would that mean for the tenancy?
We would take action, and we have taken action previously when we've had tenants that are maybe breeding animals and shouldn't be breeding animals. We'll have taken action. We'll have had cases where somebody previously had been banned from having an animal, a dog, and we found out that they had a dog within the tenancy, and we did visit that tenancy and we did take action and explain to the tenant if they didn't rehouse them.
Could that go as far as court, or could you stop the tenancy? Is it like a deal breaker?
We would have to go to court, and we would do that if we had to do it. We would do that. Luckily, we've not had to do that. Conversations and repeated visits have been enough previously. But if we had to, we would. And that's the whole reason that we got rid of the permissions. Because at the end of the day, it wouldn't matter whether someone had asked for permission for a dog or a cat or any animal. If they were mistreating that animal, the only action that we would have to take, tenancy action, would be to go to court, whether we had permission or not. So that's the reason we did away with it. And with the fact that the 2024 bill at the time was coming in, and now the 2025 Act, we knew that regardless, when there was an issue with a pet in a tenancy, we would have to take legal action, and that wouldn't matter whether there was permission or not. We had previously said to people, we'll withdraw permission, but withdrawing permission wasn't going to stop that person from having their pet anymore. We were going to have to go further down the line anyway, so that's the reason that. And I think with that conversation with the Dogs Trust as well, so it's the reason that we did do away with permission, because at the end of the day, if we have to take tenancy enforcement action, then that's what we'll do. We'll take it, and it wouldn't matter. Should we
maybe talk about the Housing Scotland Act 2025 now? How did that come about? Did you have something to do with that, Jennifer?
That was before my time at Dogs Trust, but we have fed into the Act. So we fed into the consultations, we made recommendations to the Scottish Government, and are pretty supportive of the Act in general. It does make it a lot easier for people to request permission to keep a pet, both within the social sector and the private sector. What it doesn't do is increase the supply of pet-friendly housing, so it doesn't necessarily make it easier to find accommodation if you already have a pet, particularly in the private rented sector. And really that's where I think we can come in. It's kind of providing those practical tools to make landlords feel comfortable welcoming pets into their homes. So I think you really always need both. You need the legislation and then the kind of practical application of that as well. And I hope that we're able to provide that.
It doesn't give you the right to have a pet.
No, it doesn't give you the automatic right.
It gives you the right not to be unreasonably refused.
Correct.
So what does that mean?
Well, we don't know yet. So the Scottish Government hasn't yet published guidance on what will be reasonable grounds for refusing a pet. The Renters' Rights Act has just come into force in England, and Westminster has published guidance. So potentially the Scottish guidance will look similar to that. Really, it means, at least in England, that the landlord's own perspective on pets can't be taken into account when they're making a decision on permission to keep a pet. It means that general concerns around things like property damage or future ability to rent a property if you've previously let to someone with a pet, those are things that can't be taken into consideration when looking at permission to keep a pet. Every permission request would need to be taken on a kind of case-by-case basis and based on that tenant and that potential pet. But what that looks like in Scotland, we don't know yet because we haven't got that guidance published.
I remember before the bill was made the Dogs Trust were calling for some amendments and they were looking for support for them. Some of them were shorter response times from a landlord to deal with a request, automatic appeal rights if the landlord didn't reply, and including pet ownership and tenancy agreements. So were you successful in securing any of the changes?
Yes, so in terms of the response time, that has been reduced. So I think, if I cast my mind back, the government had originally proposed that the time that a landlord would have to respond to a request was 48 days, potentially. That could be wrong. That's now been reduced to 30 days or to a month, which is great because if you do have a pet and you are having to find alternative accommodation until you've heard back from your landlord, that can be really pricey if you're looking at things like kenneling. So really the shorter response time, the better. In terms of the tenancy agreement, yes, I mean, that was already part of the model tenancy agreement, so that will just now become less of an optional part, which is great. And then the other point was around, sorry, the second question.
Oh, it was, let me see, automatic appeals?
Yeah, so at least in the private rented sector, tenants will have the option to appeal to the First Tier Tribunal if they believe that they've been refused permission unreasonably. Okay. So everything seems quite robust.
And if Linley refuses a dog to a particular tenant, who does that tenant appeal to?
They would follow the complaints process of the social landlord in place. So they would have to go through stage 1, stage 2, and then ultimately to the Ombudsman if they felt that decision was wholly unreasonable.
The sheriff?
I'm not sure if that would. I don't know if that would. No, I don't know if they'd be able to do that. I mean, we now do have it that anybody can have a pet. We do when it's a flat, when it's flatted accommodation, we'll have got a slight restriction on there, but they still are entitled to a pet. But we're just trying to keep it that if it's a big block of flats, they're not obviously wanting to overrun with, but nobody will unduly be. We did have a conversation, didn't we, about lizards and spiders and things.
Oh yes, sorry, before you go in there, what were the 6 most common pets then?
So we have dogs, cats, as you might expect, fish, birds, small animals, so that includes like your gerbils, hamsters, things like that. And then reptiles is the other one. So yeah.
So they're in.
That was a discussion that we had. So they're covered in the information packs.
Yeah, and we had a conversation because we say that we won't allow them, but some tenants do have them.
Yeah.
And if they're a good tenant, we're not really taking any action. And this is the thing I think is social landlords. I think there might be a bit of people saying, "Oh, we're not," but what action are we taking when people have got them and we know that they've got them and they're not causing any issue? We're probably not doing anything. So to be a bit more open for tenants at the start of tenancy is probably better. And then having, as I said, all the good information and leaflet packs that we've got from Dogs Trust, I think that makes a big difference.
Any interesting pets that you come across? Snakes, horses?
Not recently, no. We've not had too many recently. We have had a couple of I think the housing officers have had a couple of tarantula spiders, but I don't like to know about them because I'm a bit frightened of those kind of reptiles and things. But no.
You're an arachnophobe.
Yes, very much so.
Only there are some housing associations, for example. I doubt if you do, because I don't think you do sheltered housing, but there are some housing associations that say they just won't have pets in sheltered housing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something to do with access, maybe if you're in a flat along a great big long corridor, I suppose it's a long way to get the dog out. But are these old-fashioned practices? Are we going to sweep these away, do you think?
When we had sheltered housing, when we did have it previously, tenants were still allowed to have one dog or one cat. I do know some housing associations that have got multi-storey housing that don't allow them, but I don't know if we could reasonably say nowadays that tenants are not entitled to have a pet. I think it's legislation that maybe it comes across negatively that we think that somebody's not going to look after the dog or the pet, and we all do know that tenants, and just as human beings, we get a lot out of having pets in our lives, and I don't think just because you're a tenant that you shouldn't be able to have that in your life. And I do think that dogs and cats and animals make a bit of sort of family for people, and for everybody to have that kind of person, especially if you're a single person, having an animal can sometimes be very beneficial for you. And it was one of the things we do our tenant satisfaction survey that has to be done every 3 years in association with guidance from the Scottish Housing Regulator, and we were due to do ours in October last year when we were going through the sort of accreditation. And Dogs Trust said to us, you've not asked in your tenant satisfaction survey about pets. So we did. We went and asked about pets in our tenant satisfaction survey for the first time, something that we'd never done. And because of the size of landlord that we are, it was 40% of our tenants had to be interviewed. And of that 40%, just over 32% have a pet of some sorts, with 79% having a dog. And then 31% having a cat. So you can see there, although we don't allow two, there's obviously some people still do have the two pets. But if they're not causing any issue for us, and it's good for the family and the tenants to have that, then I think we'll have to be supportive. But I do think we'll have to take action when it doesn't go right, and when there's an animal welfare issue there. And we have done that in the past. I have been in a house and told someone to rehome their dog.
One thing though is that if you're a pensioner applying for sheltered housing, then you're told that you can't bring your dog with you and your dog is your companion. What kind of effect does that have on your mental health? And what do you think? What's the Dogs Trust saying about that? What is the actual benefit to people of having a dog or a cat or a pet?
Yeah, I mean, the benefits are pretty well proven in terms of mental health and physical health as well, especially in the cases of dogs. Having that routine and getting people out and about out of the house if they're able to, and having that companion where they might not otherwise. So the sheltered housing question is interesting because that was also a question that we were asking ourselves, really, that we believe that people kind of across the housing sector should have the right to a pet, but we don't actually know what that looks like in the case of sheltered housing. So we worked with Beeld Housing and Care. They became accredited through our scheme, and really they were doing a lot of work to be a really pet-friendly landlord anyway. So this was almost an accreditation where we wanted to learn from them, and we wanted to see how our tools could apply in the provision of housing for older people. And they apply in basically the same way. So they also have a pretty robust pet policy in place, which is really important just to set those expectations of pet owners from the get-go. We provided the information packs, again, to all staff and all tenants so that they have access to that information. And we provided the same training to Beeld staff that we provide to other organisations within the social housing sector as well. So I think that accreditation really proved to us that their doesn't need to be a barrier to pet ownership within the sheltered housing sphere. And the tools that we've developed can work there as well as for general needs accommodation.
Borrowing from this list of provocations that Jimmy brought, some people say that banning pets are effectively discriminatory against people in poverty who may rely more heavily on companion animals.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I feel like the word discrimination is always a bit tricky because the legal definition is so different to the social definition of discrimination. But do I believe that those policies or practices could be exclusionary? Absolutely. And I think from a welfare perspective in particular, there isn't a reason that someone living in the top floor of a high-rise block couldn't look after their dog or their cat or whichever pet they might have. There's no reason that they wouldn't be able to meet that animal's welfare needs. So those are the kind of bans and the kind of practices that really we want to try and tackle. Our work with Angus Housing Association was almost rubber stamping the good work that they were already doing. They were already pretty pet friendly. We just provided a bit of extra support and some extra resources and to recognise that work. But really where we want this work to go in future is tackling those more challenging positions where maybe pets aren't allowed in high-rise blocks or flats at all. And yeah, from our perspective, there's no reason that responsible pet owners can't be welcomed into any type of accommodation, really.
I've got a question for Linley. Years ago, I had to go and visit a tenant who had been let a house by a certain city council, of which I am a member, but it was a good few years ago. And it was in foul condition, absolutely foul condition. And one of the foulest things was the absolute stench of animal urine, which was soaked right into the floorboards. Now, how do you deal with that when a void comes up and it's got that level of damage and that level of contamination? Can you actually cope with that? Can you sort that house to make it a nice house without spending tens of thousands of pounds?
I'm not so sure if you could solve it by not spending the money on it, but yeah, you'll have to spend them. Associations will have to spend the money on it. But we get back properties that aren't in a good condition where pets aren't there either. So we can't necessarily say that pets are causing a lot of the damage, because we do get some properties where pets have never lived in the property and the property costs thousands of pounds to come back into relet. So to use that as an excuse for somebody not having or allowing pets within their association, I don't think it's an appropriate one, because there's lots of people who do look after their pets. And it's like everything when it comes to housing associations, not every tenant is antisocial. Not every tenant doesn't pay their rent. Mm-hmm. It's a small minority. And I think it's the same with pet ownership. There's only a small minority that don't look after their animals. And I think it's important for us as organisations, as housing associations, as social landlords, to ensure that where possible we take the appropriate action that needs to be taken, whether there's an animal involved in the property or not. Condition of tenancy is a big issue at the moment, and ensuring that we can, where possible, try and help the tenant to bring the tenancy back into the right condition. And whether it's a void or not, we'll have that responsibility if it becomes a void property to ensure that it's relating to the appropriate standards that it needs to be.
Some people say the housing staff may be too scared to enter the home of a tenancy that has a pet in there. How do you deal with that? And have you had to deal with that?
Yeah, we've dealt with that, and we say to staff now that if they feel uncomfortable, that we ask that the tenant put the animal into a room, into a closed room prior to them entering. But we actually got training from Dogs Trust. Staff got training on dealing with animals but staff were doing that previously anyway. But it was quite good for them to get the training from Dogs Trust. It gave them probably a bit more knowledge about how to deal with pets. But what we say to staff is, if you don't want to, or you're frightened of an animal, you've got the right to ask the tenant to put the animal in a different room when you're there. So we do that anyway, and we'll ask for that. If the tenant wasn't prepared to do that, then that would be something that we'd have to look at and possibly take alternative action if required. But most tenants are quite happy to do that for you. Most tenants are happy to put the pet into a different room. But there is some pets, yes, that are quite big, and some staff aren't keen on big dogs, but the majority of the time it works out okay.
If you get reports from a neighbour that a dog is being put into the play park, the fenced-off play park that kids use, because they can actually put their dog in there and it can run about, and they don't have to have it on the lead, and it can play. It can even do the activity stuff in the kids' play equipment. But then that's not going to be popular. So what's the correct answer there? Do you evict the tenant, or do you build a dog exercise area? You could do that, I know.
Yeah. I think we'd probably take action if it was a play park. We'd probably have to look to see what we could do. In our areas, in some of our areas, there's lots of green space. So we'd be asking them to take them to an alternative green space. Whether or not we could make that into a dog park, I'm not so sure. But it could be something that maybe we're needing to now look at. Maybe when this legislation comes in, it allows landlords. I mean, we've got properties close to other landlords. Should we not be doing that now? These are all questions that may come later on as the Act comes on board. Should we be doing it? I know there's a couple in Dundee, but should we be doing that? It's maybe something we need to look at.
Looking on to what's next then, Jennifer, next stages for the pilot, are you planning expansion, more research, or new partnerships?
Yeah, all of the above.
Yeah.
So the pilot officially came to an end in January of this year. The pilot was funded by a special award from People's Postcode Lottery, so that the funding has come from players of PPL, and now the work has been funded internally, which is great. So we are continuing our work across Scotland to accredit housing providers within the social sector. We're also looking to expand that work across the rest of the UK and dipping our toes into the private rented sector as well. So we've started presenting at some landlord forums and things on the back of both the Renters' Rights Act and the Housing Scotland Act. So it really feels like this is the beginning of our pet-friendly housing work at Dogs Trust. We've developed the tools, we know that the tools work, and now we really want to see what other contexts they can be applied in. And I think where we'll have the biggest impact is where those bans or those restrictions on pets do exist. That's really what we're hoping to tackle with this work, so that less people are having to come to us to rehome their dog because of housing issues, and that more people are able to access accommodation with their pets. That's really the future that we want to see.
What would you both like to see from the government or regulators or the wider sector to support this work?
I mean, from the Scottish Government, definitely the publishing of guidance on the reasonable and unreasonable refusal, like we've talked about.
When are you expecting that? Because obviously there's a quite big election.
Yeah, I did hear about this recently. I think it should be this summer, but watch this space. We'll see. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but I guess it depends on what happens in May. We'll see. In terms of other pieces of legislation, we've kind of touched on that in relation to the green spaces and things like that. I would argue that managing those issues is not necessarily the responsibility of a housing provider. We already have other pieces of legislation in place, the Control of Dogs Scotland Act, Dangerous Dogs Act, things like that. And if there was a dog to be kind of running around out of control dangerously, that might be the responsibility of the dog warden or the police to deal with. So if there are other housing providers listening to this and feeling a bit anxious about being involved in our accreditation scheme and feeling like it's going to be putting extra pressure on their staff to deal with these issues, our position is very much that it's not the position of a housing provider to be solving every animal related issue that comes to them. It's just about having the tools and extra resources to be able to signpost people or to pet owners for extra support, and that might be support from us, it might be from other organisations, but it's really just linking up all of those dots, I would say.
Yeah, the same for us. I think I would just like to see that there would be sort of legislation there that can support social housing landlords when things go wrong. Because it could be quite an expensive business for us to have to take a tenant to court when there's issues with the tenancy agreement. So it would be good to see that other agencies would maybe take some responsibility and be involved in that. And again, as I said, there's only a small minority of tenants that don't, adhere to the tenancy agreement. But when it goes wrong, it does go wrong sometimes, and it does impact other people living within the area. in estates, it can have a big impact on estates, but it'd be quite good. We have found in the past that the dog warden and things aren't always there to provide us with the support that we need when dealing with dogs. And that was one of the reasons we thought, we're struggling and there isn't a lot of support out there. But we're going to have to take action as and when required. But it'd be quite good if we didn't have to take tenancy action against someone because of their dog. That, as you said, other legislation maybe was the key to dealing with it, rather than trying to take tenancy action against someone.
Well, we're coming up to the election, and of course I'm in politics. I go around leafleting housing schemes, and absolutely terrifies the life out of me when a huge dog throws itself at the other side of the door and then tries to bite my fingers off when I'm putting them through the letterbox. So I have a less charitable view of dogs than maybe some others around this table, but there are 2 dogs in my house. I've had to learn to live with them. I get on with them fine.
Whereas I'm very pet friendly. And I do think we do have issues like that, and we do have some tenants. But again, it's for us to take action. But it would be good to have better support from other agencies. As a housing landlord, it'd be good for us to have a bit more support from other agencies when it comes to dealing with pets. We do have this issue with dogs barking, and we have had contact with the dog warden, but we don't always get the support that we need. And it's like a lot of things, I suppose, Jim, we've had this conversation before, that lots of things land on the landlord and social housing providers. We are not the ones that can fix everything. We require other agencies to do that. And I think we need to all work together in order to ensure that this doesn't happen. When it does come to dogs, unfortunately, some people don't look after their dogs and properties, and the dogs aren't trained properly. But there needs to be some kind of support out there for tenants and for everybody when it comes to looking after these dogs.
But if there was a social landlord listening to this who was perhaps a bit nervous about allowing pets within in their tenants' homes, what one piece of advice would you give them?
The conversation we've had, Jimmy knows our team, we're quite a team we speak about everything. And when it comes to us doing anything, I will speak to the wider team to see what they think. And one of the conversations we had at the time when we were going through this with Dogs Trust is that, and we used to ask for permission. A few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, we used to make people ask for permission. And as the housing officer said, I go into houses and people have got dogs and cats and there's not an issue and they haven't got permission and we don't do anything. So what is the point in us asking for this permission? What I would say with regards to the Dogs Trust, you get given a lot of, the accreditation allows you to sort of focus on something and look at things. We can all write policies, but we don't necessarily have the knowledge, the right knowledge that they do, someplace like the Dogs Trust has. And as I said, that their packs provide the staff with information and it provides the tenants with information. And we now have the QR codes. And I think it's quite a good thing for tenants to see that we are working in conjunction with other agencies. Dogs Trust is a big agency known to everybody, so it's good for them to know that we're working with them. So I think that focuses the tenant a little bit more to know that we've had your expertise has been passed upon us to try and help ensure that we can have pet-friendly tenancies.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up there. My thanks go to Linley Anderson from Angus Housing Association and Jennifer Leonard from the Dogs Trust. I'm just sad that there wasn't a dog in the studio at the time.
Next time.
Next time.
That would have been nice.
So we'll be back with another episode of the Scottish Housing News podcast soon.